We're driving in the Fastlane on the way to WrestleMania, which means it's Monday, and that means it's time for a brand new episode of Monday Musings. Let's get started. So as I was watching WWE Fastlane last night and witnessing what could possibly be the last team up, or at least the last team up for a while, of The Shield, as Dean Ambrose's contract is up and he's not re-signing with WWE supposedly, and so this was supposedly the last performance of The Shield together. And it got me to thinking about factions, wrestling factions, which is something that's kind of a dying breed. It's something that used to be commonplace in the world of wrestling, and now, aside from the New Day and The Shield, which are basically three-man tag teams like the Freebirds, you don't really see factions like that anymore. The last big ones were some of the ones that we're going to talk about, so I won't go into that, but a faction or a stable is a group of wrestlers that come together, and basically it's when they throw people together because they don't really know what to do with them individually, or their gimmicks haven't been working out, so they throw them together and see what they can do. And sometimes it really works, sometimes it really doesn't. But I thought it would be fun to kind of count down my top 10 factions of all time. And there are a lot that did not make this list. I'm just going to put it out there. Freebirds and New Day came really close. They're 11 and 12 for me. But again, I consider them just six-man tag team groups. And also, the factors that I'm going here with are factions that had a lasting impact on whatever federation they were involved in. And also, how many top-level superstars came out of these factions. That the best factions, I think, involved multiple people that could stand on their own without the faction and just made the factions stronger. So that's kind of what I'm basing it on. So number 10 is Devastation Incorporated. Now, if you've not heard of them, they're from way back in Texas days of WCCW, USWA, and it was an organization run by General Skandar Akbar. And it included Cactus Jack, of all people, before he went to WCW and ECW and WWE, all that. Mick Foley was part of this group, and you had Terry Garvin and Eric Embry and, oh man, so many other superstars I cannot remember. But at the time, in that federation, in that wrestling promotion, they were a force to be reckoned with. Their numbers were always growing. They had people turning on their partners left and right. They had a deep stable of wrestlers that just kind of caused problems for everybody. They ran roughshod over the entire company, and it had this huge impact over the course of that company for years. And it was really interesting to see what they did with that faction and the turns and the twists and everything that was involved with that was really interesting and really fun to watch. If you were into the smaller promotions, and at the time I watched it on ESPN after school, so it was fun times back in the day. Number 9 for me is Nexus. Now, the reason Nexus is so low on this list, and I think Nexus was a great idea. I think the Shield was what Nexus wanted to be. And I think the Nexus had a great potential, and they came in with this gimmick of, we're the upstarts, and we're just going to tear the WWE apart. And for about a minute, they did with all their superstars, but they quickly got dwindled down to 5 people. And of those 5 people, not a single one of them became a household name. The only one left of that original 5 is Heath Slater. I got kids. You know what I'm saying? So it's okay, you had this great concept and you had all these guys that were really talented, but for whatever reason, they just could not survive outside of that group. And even within that group was very limited, and after a while, you just didn't believe in it anymore. So, but for the reason they make this list is because of what they did do, that impact they had for those couple of years, and the way they changed the landscape. These were the original NXT guys. They built the groundwork for what NXT became. So they belong on this list for that alone. Number 8 is the Dangerous Alliance. This is a faction that Paul E. Dangerously, or Paul Heyman, had in WCW. And it was this 5-man group of people that, okay, some of them had some notoriety, but I don't know. At the time, it was like, okay, these guys could be something cool, and some of them have done really great things. You had Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton. Bobby Eaton of Midnight Express, tag team champion. Arn Anderson, 4 Horsemen. You had Ravishing Rick Rude, who came really close to becoming world champion in WWE and did become world champion in WCW. You had Larry Zbyszko, who was the AWA champion. He was royalty in AWA. Nowhere else, really. But AWA, he was a big thing. And then you had Stunning Steve Austin. And when you think about that, you had Paul Heyman with Stunning Steve Austin, or Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Ravishing Rick Rude, and Arn Anderson. And you think about that, that is a faction to be reckoned with. And yet, yeah, they had a few highlights in WCW, but nothing like huge. And when you think about that and you look back at the careers of these guys and know who they are and where they've come from and what accomplishments they had after that, it's like, man, that was a killer faction. So there you go. And that was back when you really were a Paul Heyman guy. You know what I'm saying? That's like the precursor to ECW and all this stuff. So number 7 is the Corporation. Corporation is McMahon's, the McMahon's group that they brought together of top superstars like The Rock and Big Boss Man and people like that, and Ken Shamrock to rule and reign. It was basically the precursor of the Authority. And so that, again, you lay the groundwork there, and you had The Rock on McMahon's side. So, I mean, you have one of the top stars leading the charge in that, and they called all the shots, made all the matches and stuff like that. So, and you had big superstars like that, like Ken Shamrock and Big Boss Man and The Rock, that all did great things. So, there you go. Number 6 is the Heenan family. The Heenan family, which I almost had forgotten about. I mean, not that I could forget about the Heenan family, but I wasn't really thinking of them in terms of this because I was thinking more factions than stables. The great thing about the Heenan family is Bobby Heenan, all-time one of the greatest managers of all time, and he had this incredible stable of revolving superstars that were like top names. I'm talking Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, multiple-time Intercontinental Champion. Ravishing Rick Rude, multiple-time Intercontinental Champion, WCW World Champion. Andre the Giant, one of the great legends of all time in wrestling. You had the Islanders. You had the Barbarian and Haku, and Hercules. So many other names that did tremendous things in the WWE, and many of them without the WWE. Kurt Hennig, before he came to WWE, was a big name in CWA, and then he did. He wasn't a big name in WCW. I mean, he was, but he didn't do big things. But he goes down in the Hall of Fame as Mr. Perfect, right? Ravishing Recruit. These are just huge names, and Bobby Heenan had a hand in managing them and kind of guiding them to that promised land. And again, they were a faction to be reckoned with because they were always there and always a thorn in like Hogan's side and Macho Man's side and Jake the Snake Roberts' side and all these different big name superstars. If you needed and the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard from the Four Horsemen, they were on Heenan's family as well. If you needed a villain for one of your big top superstars to face, you get a member of the Heenan family. Alright, so getting to that top 5. Number 5, and this is going to surprise you, it's a little bit lower than you might expect, D-Generation X. And this is a faction that, again, it's one of those long-lasting factions that keeps coming back and back and back, and you have that nostalgia factor, and every time you need some kind of boost, you bring back Shawn Michaels and Triple H and have them do something. So when you think about those two, you took Shawn Michaels, who at the time had really done it all, but he was kind of hitting a plateau. And you take Triple H, who is this up-and-comer, who has been Intercontinental Champion, been solid Intercontinental Champion, but was kind of stuck in that lane. And you put them together. So you put like the mentor and the mentee together, and you have them do outlandish things, and it blew up. And both of them just went beyond stratosphere. And of course, Triple H, now one of the biggest names in wrestling, running the company and married to the boss's daughter and all this stuff. So talking about long-lasting effects and every member of this faction being something big. I mean, when you think of the original DX, which was those two in China, you think of Triple H and Shawn Michaels as two of the biggest names in all of wrestling history ever. And you add to that Road Dogg and Billy Gunn and X-Pac, and those guys are also synonymous with greatness. You know, Road Dogg and Billy Gunn were like 5-6 times tag team champions. X-Pac was part of NWO and had all these single accolades and tag titles as well. So all of them is a well-rounded team that everybody knows. They're household names if you're a wrestling fan. And of course, Shawn Michaels and Triple H stand head and shoulders above the rest of them, but still a great faction that did tremendous things and pushed the envelope tremendously out there. All right, so number 4, Evolution. Evolution, the next evolution of the Four Horsemen. And the really cool thing about Evolution is every single member of that faction was a big deal, was a big name. And maybe not at the time. You know, you took 2 veterans, Triple H, who led D-Generation X for many years when Shawn Michaels was out and became head of the company, and you take Ric Flair, who is one of the, if not the greatest of all time, 16-time world champion, Four Horsemen leader, and you take those two and you put underneath them 2 rising stars in Batista and Randy Orton. And you look at what every single one of those people have done, whether it was before Evolution or after Evolution, in the case of Randy Orton and Batista, these are top billed named stars. Batista's a freaking movie star. Randy Orton is a 12, 13-time world champion, and he is definitely first ballot Hall of Famer in the making, 3rd generation superstar. So, and anytime they're another faction that you can bring back together anytime you want and do something special with them. Again, right now you've got Triple H and Batista going at each other, so you're still kind of dipping into that Evolution pool to do something with that. So it's pretty cool. So they are definitely one of the absolute best. Number 3, speaking of the Four Horsemen, you're like, Four Horsemen aren't number 1? No, because, and this goes back to my whole kind of stipulations. When you think about the Four Horsemen, you think Ric Flair and his sidekick Arn Anderson above all the others. Now, there have been several members of the Four Horsemen: Lex Luger, Tully Blanchard, Ole Anderson, Sid Vicious, Barry Windham, Steve Mongo McMichaels, Dean Malenko, and a name we won't talk about. But you've had a bunch of different members of the Four Horsemen. I almost called them Fantastic Four. But when you think of classic Horsemen, you're thinking Tully Blanchard, Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, and Ric Flair, and then Barry Windham, and after that. So my Horsemen, the era that I really watched them in was Barry Windham, Arn Anderson, Ric Flair, and then you kind of had that rotating 4th person for a while. Sid Vicious was there. Ole Anderson kind of went back and forth. So those were kind of my Four Horsemen. The thing is, though, even though some of them did some great things, Barry Windham won world titles. Sid Vicious went to WWE as Sid Justice and kind of had this run with Hogan and things like that. When you really think of the great success of the Four Horsemen, it's Ric Flair. And even though that faction ran WCW for like a decade or longer, decade and a half, until the NWO came along, the Horsemen were the faction. And, whether, they were on and off, but when they were on, it was, the Horsemen you had, and that's kind of where Sting came from. He came from being the hero that took out the Horsemen and warred with the Horsemen and wrestled with the Horsemen he was technically a Horseman for like 30 seconds. So, yeah, they just, and of course, Ric Flair is a 2-time Hall of Famer because of the Horsemen and his solo career as well. So again, that kind of highlights my point. But all of them have done great things. Tag team champions, Intercontinental champion, or not Intercontinental champions, but United States champion, TV champion, whatever. So they definitely belong on the list. But I just thought these top two were just a little bit higher. So number 2, Sierra, Hotel, India, Echo, Lima, Delta, Shield. The Shield is a faction that came out of nowhere. They were 3 young guys who wanted to make an impact in this business. They've been trying to come up. Individually, they just weren't clicking. It wasn't working. They were doing some great things in NXT and other places, OVW and things like that. But collectively, when you put them together, it was something special. It was something different. It was what Nexus wanted to be. They came in and they ran the place for years. And then they broke up. And each and every single one of these 3 men, Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, became world champion. They are top billed stars. Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns, especially, leading the entire company right now, leading the entire company for the past few years. Dean Ambrose not far behind. Now Dean Ambrose is going off somewhere else. My guess is AEW to be one of their biggest stars. We'll see what happens. But when you think of that, when you think of the longevity of the Shield, and anytime, again, they could come back in 10 years and it's Shield reunion, people are going to go crazy, you're going to see the Shield bomb, and it's going to be nuts. These are 3 guys that every single one of them is top caliber, and that just doesn't happen in a faction often. But there you have it with the Shield. Number 1, though, has to go the NWO. This was a faction that birthed the Monday Night Wars, that took wrestling to heights that it had never seen before and has never seen since, and probably will never see again. It was just something special where you take 2 former WWE guys, forgetting the fact that they were in WCW before they went to WWE as Diesel and Razor Ramon, but you bring them back kind of and under this storyline of them invading WCW, and then you have the biggest face, the biggest good guy, the biggest hero of all time in wrestling, Hulk Hogan, turn and become their leader, and then you build upon that and you add top caliber superstars. Yeah, you add a bunch of underlings too, but you have top names all over that place, and then they run that company for 4 years. And you bring them back several times in WWE. You still have people in the crowds wearing NWO shirts today. There is not another faction in wrestling history, except for maybe the Four Horsemen, that have, and DX, that have that kind of impact, that lasting impact that you just know. Oh, NWO? Oh yeah, I know who NWO is. And I'll say not even the Shield have that, and maybe DX not even quite as strong. I'd say you could go up to a general non-wrestling fan and say Four Horsemen or NWO, and they'd know what you're talking about, at least in broad terms. And that's huge, and that's why these guys, and especially with the NWO, that's why these guys are number 1. On my list. So those are my top 10 factions. I'm sure you disagree with some of them, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know what you think. And thanks for letting me sidetrack Monday Musings into a wrestling themed show. It is WrestleMania season. Next month is WrestleMania, and I'm really looking forward to it. So kind of got wrestling on the brain right now. So that's what's up. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe notification bell so you get updates on all the content going up to this channel. And you can follow me at Brant Fowler on Facebook and Twitter, and at Last Number Press on Instagram. And until next time, thanks for watching. Be good.